This couldn't happen.
Hello, how's it going? Good to see everybody. Looks like everything's working here. How we doing? Making sure all my stuff works well here. There we go. Got it. Okay. Sweet. Looks like everything is working okay here. All right, cool. I just need to get a couple files downloaded, but happy Friday. I think this is the best way that we're going to get through Substance Painter, at least for this portion of assignment number 1, just because I think my biggest thing was I didn't want to have you guys redo all the work you did, right? And so now that we know for next time, for the next assignment, that we can roll with the older version of Substance Painter, right? That's kind of the goal. So it's when we get to that step with assignment 2, we'll just know, and then you can bounce back and forth between the classrooms and we can do it that way. But with the situation the way it was, I think this is the best way to do it. And then we have a full blown video of going through the steps, and then you guys can ask your questions in here. Is the background Infinity Blade? No, it's Barad-dûr from Lord of the Rings. Mount Doom in the background. So yeah, that's kind of my thought process there. And I think, yeah, I don't think there was a better way around it, so this is what we're gonna do. With that being said, I need to get a file downloaded here so we can kind of jump into the processes. Let me open up Substance Painter as well. So we're going to walk through step by step from beginning to hopefully the end if we can get through some good painting techniques. And I want to talk you through some stuff. And hopefully I can answer some questions about some of the issues you've been going through and problems that you've had with your bake so far. So I think I've left a couple issues in my model so that when I go to bake, I can help you resolve some of those issues. I think I have, so I'm going to try so that we can kind of step through some issues together that I've noticed that are pretty easy ones to kind of nail and talk about. So that's the goal for today. So I'm hoping when I get this open, sweet. Okay. All right. So first things first, right? I do want to open up the model, right? So when I go to open my model, and I'm going to change a couple things here. I like to have my Substance Painter set up a little differently. I like to have all my materials and stuff here. And then I like to have properties over here. And then I usually have my texture set and my layers and things over here. So I kind of have a couple areas to work through, but I like to have something set up more like this. But as I'm starting the file, right, I'm going to hit new file here. Okay. And we probably stepped through this, but just for the sake of things, right? I'm going to select a template that is the PBR metallic roughness with alpha blend. So that should be right here. So that works great. And then I'm going to select my file that I just grabbed. So we'll open this up. And then you can pick your texture size. I'm going to do a 2048 texture. I think that's what I did for my UVs. So we'll roll with that. And then everything else here is okay. We can just hit OK. And that's going to open up our model here, right? So if you first jump in and your model looks okay like this, good, right? You've made it past the first steps, right? But the next thing here to do once you're in here is you're going to run a bake. And so we're going to walk through some steps of why and how we solve some of these problems, right? So first things first that you're going to do is over in your texture set settings, you're going to run down and there's a little map right here, or a little area called Bake Mesh Maps. You're going to click this, okay? And when you click this, it opens up this new menu where it shows you your cage file and some different things, right? And you can check some issues and problems before you start your bake. We will review our current work soon. Yep. So we'll go through some of that too. I just want to step through these first initial phases and then kind of talk problems, and then I'll look at some of these other problems as well. So, but yeah, you're going to run through it. You've got your cage. We can talk about these things. If you start having some issues with your model, and your cage looks weird and you have some red things on here, we can talk about that. So you can have a cage file that will run through stuff with you. And, but cage file we don't have right now, so we can use Substance cage file. But what we're going to do first here is I'm going to pick a 2048 map. And then I am going to make sure that I have the maps that I want checked to bake. These are the ones I want to roll with. I'm good with baking everything here. Then I'm going to check some anti-aliasing, because sometimes what happens with these models is when you don't have anti-aliasing turned on, you get some weird edges and some artifacting and some weird things that happen around edges. So when you run these anti-aliasing properties through your bake, it just cleans up the bake a little bit more. And we'll go through here. We don't have a high poly, so we're just going to run through and hit bake, okay? And what happens here is it's going to bake out all these materials for us that we have selected. And then you can go back to your painting mode. And then you can kind of look and see, hey, do I have some weird issues happening on my bake? Now, I think for the most part, my bake turned out okay. I have a pretty clean UV set, and so that works okay. But I am going to show you an issue here, right? So you'll notice right here on my model, I have this shadow popping up on this side from this piece of the model. Now, the reason that's happening is because the shadow is being applied here, right? There's also some artifacting and things on the edges that we can look at. This might be cleaned up with some anti-aliasing, so we can look at maybe taking a look at that. We also have some weird lines and edges here that we can maybe take a look at in the bake, see how we can clean some of this stuff up. All right, some edges and things that are happening here. So we might need to jump back into the main file and see what could be causing some of this stuff. So we can check some of that out. For the most part, everything else is okay. It's just these edges that are being a little funny. So I just kind of rotate this around and change my light source. So shift and left click allows you to rotate your light. Substance Painter's interface is very similar to that of Maya's, where you can hold Alt and click to rotate in this view, Alt and middle mouse button to pan, and then zoom is your scroll wheel is your zoom. It's very much the same sort of interface. So navigating through here shouldn't feel awkward. You should be pretty used to it. I do have some weird baking issues happening down here as well. So I might need to check out what's going on with my UV map here too. So I've got some issues to play to kind of work through on this map. And so I want to talk about some ways that we can approach this and see how to fix some of this stuff, right? But with that being said, that these are the kind of issues you're all running into, I'm sure, where you've got weird shadows, some weird edges that are popping up. Some of you have some flipped faces and things, right? So that can all be fixed. It just most of the time ends up being an issue with the model. So we need to go back to Maya and run through some stuff in Maya and see kind of what is causing our issues, right? So the first culprit is usually the UV map. Sometimes it's the mesh. There's some things that we can look at through there to see what's causing these problems, right? Now I got to make sure my Maya license is working. I got a new computer, and so some of this stuff is still working out the kinks. In the meantime, while that's opening, let's take a look at some of these things here. Okay, so we've got some issues in here. I'm just going to pull up your guys' stuff here on the Discord so we can look through. So we have some issues here that are popping up. Man, this Maya thing's really annoying. See if I can get my Maya license. Okay, let's see. Okay. Did that work or no? Not going to let me open Maya here. Let's see. This is probably why. Okay, now is this available? shouldn't have to do that. Sorry, guys, for the technical difficulties here. This is annoying. We'll try this. See if it likes this. The joys of my... Yeah, you're not joking. Hopefully that opens. Okay, let's jump back into Discord here and see if I can look at some of this. Okay. You've attempted the fixes mentioned in this thread, and my model still gets artifacts when being baked. Does anyone have any other potential idea? Okay. So this looks to me like it could be mesh related. That looks mesh related to me, or potentially UV related. If you have your Maya file, you could send it to me and we could open that up and check. Yeah, if you send your model through here, we can look at it for sure. I'm happy to do that. Here's some progress. This is looking good. Yeah, I really like the hand painting that you're doing here. This looks great. I think this is turning out well. I can see that this is going to take a while for each rock piece, but I like what I'm seeing here. Yeah, all these pieces are looking pretty good. This hand-painted stuff can take a while, or I like what you're doing, though. It looks good. Yeah, I think something that could push this even further for the these pieces where it's particularly shiny, you might be able to throw a roughness, like a metallic roughness slider on these paint layers and give it a little bit of metal, because I think in the reference, maybe it does. I don't know. I'll leave that up to you. But to me, it looks like gold veins or something flowing through the model a little bit. And so maybe a little bit of a metallic roughness layer on these would be cool. Because the rest is kind of like stone to me. So I like the matte. But then, yeah, on those, I think it could be cool. I think it's looking really good. Some of your tentacles have become really squishy. Okay. When I started over from scratch, I didn't do this last time. Okay, I see this. So what you could do here, what I would do with this, I'm not sure how the backside is responding, but I would delete this one and duplicate it to the other side, and then try to re-import and see if it still gives you this weird look. Sometimes it sets the faces to be softened edges. So you could also click this piece in Maya and hit mesh harden edge on there, like the mesh display harden edge on all of these, or click the whole thing and hit mesh display set to face. Sometimes that fixes it. Oh, you're working with the FBX. Yep. New version of your blade. Sweet. Awesome. Merging vertices. Okay, good. Just waiting on this Maya install. As soon as this finishes, then we can jump in there. Yeah, I'm glad that fixed that for you. As far as the other one goes, as soon as I can open Maya, I can open this up and check it out. Let's jump through some of this stuff though. So some of the problems that arise when you're here, right? This to me looks like it's something with the unwrap. So I'm going to check my unwrap. What's happening here is these are stacked. And so the shadow from here is being applied up here, right? So I need to check that and see how that's stacked. I might need to rearrange my UVs a little bit. This stuff happening here could be a problem with the model itself. So I may just need to check my UVs here and see what's happening. Because it's doing fine with these curly pieces in other spots. The other thing too that you can do when you start getting these weird shadows is doing an exploded view. So you go into Maya and you do something like this. So I need to find my exploded version. You go like this. Okay. Do you end up with something that looks like this? Where you explode stuff away? Now I could potentially do even more exploded away pieces here. But you end up with something like this. I don't know which ones of these are the most accurate. I'm going to download a couple here. Okay, looks like my Maya finished updating. Let's try again. Please, work this time. Trying to figure out how to find my license here so I can just do this and be done. Mm-hmm. This is really frustrating. I can't figure out how to do this. Yeah, I'm happy to look at that one too. I'm just trying to figure out how to get my Maya to open here really quickly. My Autodesk Access is connected. I should just be able to use my stuff. Very annoying. Yeah, do you mind? Yeah. So the light in Substance Painter is making it turn a weird purple. So we can take a look at that. It could be layering or something like that, but yeah, we'll take a look. Just need this to update. Maybe this will fix it. The joys of a new computer, too. Figured Maya would open just fine. goodness. Okay, maybe here. Maybe I can ask a question somewhere. Let's see. Okay. Well, if Maya is not going to work, I don't know what to do here. I wonder if I download an earlier version of Maya if it gives me the same problem. probably will. Okay. Okay. Man, I'm at a loss here. Yeah, we could jump into project 2 a little bit, and I'll try to figure this out, and we'll just end up swapping some stuff around here a little bit. That was not the plan, but we can get into some of that today. I don't know if my ZBrush, that's the thing, is does my ZBrush work too? If that doesn't work, then I'm at a loss there too. The computer's from the school, so I got a nice machine for home from the school, and so I think it's tied to some of the network stuff at the school, but this is working, so sweet. Okay, we'll just pivot gear. We'll just change gears a little bit. Substance Painter will have to wait while I try to get some of this Maya issue worked out. I'm still happy to review some of that stuff if you want to send it through the Discord as far as your substance files go and some of the questions you've got. So send those through and I'll answer some questions on that. But yeah. Okay, you adjusted some of those materials. Yeah, I like the metal sheen on there now. I think that looks good. Yep. I like that. Does give it a little bit of a cooler feel to it. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Alex asked a question. How to best do the top design on the Scarab sword. Yeah. Okay, so here we can still talk through some substance questions for sure. So let me at least drop in a model here and we can talk some painting questions. Might not be able to fix Maya issues like I wanted to, but we can go over some painting stuff. So, yeah. I think that's probably better. We'll do that instead. I can do assignment 2 stuff next week. So maybe we just talk some painting practices here. My file's going to be a little messed up. My goal was to kind of fix it with you guys, but that's probably just not going to happen right now until I get a hold of the IT guy. So we'll do this instead. We'll go here. Let's select this guy. Things good. Okay, we'll just bake these out, and then we'll walk through. We'll talk some painting practices here. Because I do want to go through some substance stuff. No. Yeah. We'll talk about that. I'm still frustrated about the Maya thing, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go through here and bake all these textures out. Make sure I'm at a 2048 here. All this looks okay. Let's turn on the, really jump up the super sampling instead. See if that can help. That's okay. All right, we're going to run through and bake these out. And then I want to just jump into some painting practices with you all, because I think there's some things that we can talk about as you're going through and starting this painting process that I think would be good. So, for example, question was asked for doing this design here. I would probably paint this. There's some other ways you could go about doing it, but I'm going to show you getting in some base paint colors here and some folder organization stuff. So as far as this goes, as soon as you start painting, everywhere where you're going to change your texture, you're going to want to start breaking things out into folders. I can quickly go over UI stuff for Substance Painter, but I feel like I've shown you some videos for UI already. So let's jump into some of this stuff, and I'll just kind of describe things as I go through. But for example, if I'm going to start working on Blade and I'm going to start dropping in a bunch of different base materials everywhere, I'm going to try to break out each material into its own folder. So I might say this is going to be the base metal folder. Okay. And in the base metal folder, now that I have this, I can drop layers in here, right? So I can have a specific paint layer here. So I can have base color, right? I can do this. The nice thing that you can do though now is, if you want to, you can start fresh with a bunch of new layers too. So you've started this folder. I'm just going to do a base fill layer here. I'm going to nuke this layer out. I'm going to say this base fill layer here is actually going to be my base color. And then over here on the left-hand side, right, now that I've set my layer for my base color, I'm going to make myself really small here on this. Kind of move myself out of the way as much as I can. I might be covering up some of the materials area, but that's okay. So over here on the left-hand side, I have all these options for base colors, right? So for example, when I talked earlier and said, hey, you could bump up the metallic roughness of that layer, right? So you can jump up and make something a little more metallic with some of these sliders. For the base color, I usually tend to, unless I know it's something that's going to have a little bit of a sheen to it, and with some of this stuff, I usually just start with just a color like this, and sometimes I'll do a roughness map, and then I usually just throw the roughness map all the way to 0 so that it can be a very matte layer, and then I can grab a color in here. Usually it's good to start with the reference. Actually, 0 is the other way. So this is super shiny. You can jump it down to really matte, right? And I'm going to usually have my reference here. So let's throw this up on the screen, and I'm going to show you how to color pick from a reference, which I think is helpful. So if you go in here, you can grab your reference. I'm just going to make sure I have the reference here through the assignment page, and then I'll show you how to kind of color pick for that. Let's go here to assignment. Open block out. Should have those in there. Perfect. Okay, so now I have my reference image, right? So I can go through here and kind of pick from these colors. So if I have this open here, I can have it open on another screen. So I'm going to have it open on another screen. And I can actually go through and color pick if I click this. And on my other screen, you can see if I have this on the other screen, I can color pick any color anywhere on the screen, right? So I can have that color picker open and have my reference image on my other screen over here. And I can go to color pick something and I can grab that color. So I'm going to grab probably the darkest base metal color I have over here, which is one of these kind of darker purpley colors, which looks kind of like this. And I'm going to let this be my base metal, right? So the nice thing now that we have this set up in this folder structure is this base metal can now have a black mask applied to it. So we can mask out which areas on the weapon are going to have this material applied, right? So I can go through here and add this black mask. So if I right click on this folder, we're applying it to the whole folder, which is nice. So now anything that's in the stack in that folder is going to have that masking applied to it, right? So anything that we do with this base metal color now is only going to apply to the areas that are assigned to the folder's mask. So I can go in here, add the black mask to the folder. And there's a few different ways that you can go about adding a mask. You can paint a mask, right? Or you can do a couple different things. There's polygon fills, which I think is the easiest way. You can also fill by UV chunk, which is doing this, right? So I can actually just fill and click every area that's going to have this base metal applied to it just by clicking on it, which is all these areas, right? I could actually go through and say, okay, yeah, this base metal is great, but maybe I'm just going to have that be the blade metal. And maybe I'll do something different in these other spaces. But for right now, we'll go through and just assign it to all these areas where that base metal is, right? So we've got this. We've got these pieces here. These pieces here, right? And then we've got these pieces here. These ones. And then this. And then the ball on the bottom and this piece, right? So now the base metal has been applied everywhere. I think even these barnacles are kind of that same base metal color. So we'll even throw some of those on there. Okay, sweet. So that base metal has been applied. And we can jump back over here. I think I missed one UV chunk, which is right here. So I'll go jump back into my mask. Do my fill, grab that one. Sweet. Okay. So now we've got that base metal applied to these areas, right? And maybe I do need to fill a couple more chunks. So click back on my mask, go over here, make sure I'm getting all of these selected, which I think I have now. Sweet. Okay. So we have this broken out. This looks pretty good now, right? We have this base metal applied. Now, it's not perfect. It's not the best texture ever, but we have a base to start from, right? And I'm going to go through and do a couple more folders here. So I'm going to do a base leather for the handle. I'm going to go through and do base leather. Or we can just call this leather too. Like you could do metal. Because this is, we can start really modifying this too. So we can just say this is our metal material, this is our leather, and then we can add in the leather, we can add a new fill layer in here and call this base leather. I'm going to grab just a roughness and a color for this one as well. I'm going to turn that roughness to totally matte, and then I'm going to color pick that color too. So now I've got probably the darkest color of that red. And then I'm going to apply a black mask to this one, right? And then I'm going to UV chunk fill that area, right? So that I have my base leather filled now, right? So I've got this there. It's looking pretty good. I like the matte. It feels decent. Remember, just ignore some of these issues for now. We'll talk about how to fix those a different time, but for now I want to talk painting stuff. So now that we've got these base materials applied, I have one more. I have the base eye material that I kind of want to play with here. So I am going to go into my texture, my layers, and I'm going to do like the eye material or the eye folder, right? Then I'll add a fill layer to this. And I am going to do a color and roughness for this one, but I'm going to leave the eye a little shinier. And then I'm going to go into some stuff here. Grab this fill layer. This is going to get color picked to be the color of that eye. Let's look something like this for right now. We'll add a black mask to this, and I'm just going to click here. And I know this is a problem, so I'll have to adjust that eye a little later. Because I left the problem of the UV, just to give you an example. I have a fill layer here, or a paint layer. Might actually be okay. If I go to paint straight on this. Like if you paint straight in here, I don't know if this line's quite up. Yeah. See, that's a little tilted. So this is one of those situations where my UV doesn't quite match. See how it's tilted over here, but I'm drawing straight on the UV map over here. So this is one of those things where you'd end up probably just painting over here to make sure you get stuff in the right direction, but we'll talk about that as we get to it. Make sure I'm answering questions. Let's see here. Okay, with Substance Painter assignment being pushed back, will the date for the bust also be pushed back? No. So we'll probably jump into the bust. Yeah, it might be actually. Let me just double check some dates here. You guys have spring break next week. So let me see. So bust blockout was due today. Yep, that will get changed. So we'll edit this a little bit. This is going to get jumped to probably, this is spring break. We'll do it here. And then some of this stuff is going to get moved around a little bit, but that's okay. So we'll have 2 weeks to do. We're going to have to really kind of crank through some of this other stuff, but it's okay. So you'll have a, final, we'll do block out for a week, final sculpt for a week, and then retop for a week, or maybe 2 weeks. And then we'll have painting for 2 weeks. Yeah, that should be fine. So this will get pushed back to here. So that will be the week you get back from, so next week spring break, and then we'll work on blockouts, and we should be able to finish the blockout in class during the 3 hours. So that should be fine. First pass paint and final diffuse paint are just going to get bumped in general. So final diffuse is also going to get pushed to be the week after spring break, so you can have some time to look at that. After just talking about some of these painting techniques today, just so you have some time to work on some of this. So they'll be due the same day. I might actually just delete this assignment and just make it the final diffuse map. But I'll think about that a little bit, or just add the points and add them together and just make it one assignment. That's probably how I'll do it. So yeah, those will get bumped back a little bit. So let's jump back into this. Let's talk some things here. Since my sword is made of stone, should I try to make the stone parts less matte? Or is the way to make it feel like stone without having to add a ton of other stuff? The thing that I would try to do for that stone, I think the biggest thing, because they are hand painted, we're not trying to go for real hyper realism, right? So I would look at some examples from World of Warcraft where they do the stone in certain areas and see how they do it. So like in game, if you're looking at stuff in WoW, here's something that's made out of stone, right? And this is how I always kind of judge these things, right? So you can kind of see they are doing a lot of that in the hand paint. So I would do some speckled kind of stuff that happens and do some of these things that help that crag sort of feel, right? Where you're painting in some cracks and shadows into those things. A lot of that is handled through your sword's design in general, right? So your sword is like this, right? So some of that craggy stuff that's happening here is already being handled that way. So I think if you just further push that and make sure you're hitting highlights and lowlights in these cracks, it will help. So take a look at how they're doing them in these examples. You can see they do lower lights in here, and then they're hitting highlights on the high edges, right? Then they do a little bit of noise to help with that kind of stuff. So they paint in some noise, right? So I think that helps. Okay. Let's jump back here. So now we've got these folders, right? All these folders have some pieces to them. So from this point, there's some cool things we can do without having to start completely hand painting from this point, right? We can start doing some masking and some generators and things to help push these things a little further, right? So for example, in this base metal layer, let's throw in a fill layer here, and we're just going to call this like you could call this surface distortion or something, or you know, you could call this whatever you want, dirt, or however you want to say this is. It's just calling, you could call it texture. And this is going to end up being another fill layer, right? And this one's just going to be a color. We're going to let the roughness be defined by the base color here. So we can go in here and we could also apply roughness to it. I don't care either way. But I'm going to go through and grab another color in my reference image here that might be a little bit lighter or darker. I might go a little lighter here. So I grabbed a really dark color, but I'm going to grab like maybe a mid-tone here and do some of this. And I'm going to do this as the edgeware. We could do an edgeware layer. Let's do this as the surface texture layer though. And I'm going to grab, yeah, I'm still going to grab a mid-tone. And just try to give it some variation in color a little bit. So it's a little bit lighter, right? That's great. And then I'm going to go through here and add a generator to this. So I right click this layer and hit add generator. And then this generator layer over here I can mess with. I can click here. And the generator is just going to have those things on it. I can click and do like a dirt layer. So if we do dirt, this is getting applied here now. Right? So, nope, that's not right. I got to do that a little differently. We got to add the generator to a mask. So we'll add it to, add a black mask to this, and then we'll add a generator to this. We'll add the generator to the mask. We'll say dirt here. That's better. Okay, so now we have something like this being applied to just the metal layers, right? Now for this one, you can mess with this dirt level and stuff here, but really what I'm trying to do is give the surface some variation, right? As you saw in this Blizzard image, if I can pull this back up, there's some noise and surface distortion on these objects that help push that painterly feel, right? So if I can do that by just generating it instead of having to hand paint everywhere in here, that's the goal, right? So I can kind of generate some of that stuff. You can mess with this grunge scale. Some of this allows you to kind of see and change how that surface distortion looks all over here. You can have it mask edges more or less by sliding some of this stuff. But the one thing that helps push this is there's another thing that you can add to this called a blur slope. So if we add a filter to this, and in the filter, we look for one called blur slope. And it's right here. Now you can see this blur slope is allowed to change. So right now this is really kind of hyper realistic sort of dirt that's on here. But if I change this blur slope, now you can see it's giving this sort of brush stroke effect that's happening here, which is what I'm trying to go for, right? I want that sort of painterly feel on this. And then I can jump back to my dirt layer and change the dirt level and see, right, how much that's affecting the surface layer. I can also go in here and start doing some layer blending, which is nice. So right now this is set to normal, but you can go through here and start setting things to be a multiply or a divide or like an overlay. You can set certain things to be, right? You can set it to be a different lighting color and those types of things. So you can do layer blending. That stuff helps as you get deeper in there. But we have set that sort of surface. Yeah, it's being recorded. It will save to my YouTube channel. Yep. So I have this sort of surface distortion that's happening now to the blade that I like, right? That just looks a little painterly. You can mess more with this blur slope, change the intensity of it if you want. That really helps push some of that. So if you like it to look, you know, more like this, right? You can do that. You can change that intensity. You can also just turn down the opacity of that layer too. Like, let's say you just want something more like this, right? You just like the idea of it being, you know, affecting the surface, right? Just adding some depth to that paint without having to go in and hand paint everything. It's nice, right? So we've got that. So we have our texture layer, which is sweet. We can add more layers to this. We can add layer on top of layer on top of layer, right? So for example, let's do another one here. We're going to do another base color. I'm going to grab a little bit lighter color than the one I grabbed already. So I'm going to grab like maybe a more silvery color off of my reference here. So I have something like this. And then I'm going to apply black max to this one. This I'm going to call Edgeware. And so I applied that black mask, and then I'm going to add a generator to this one. And I can go in here and add a different generator. So, for example, there's one that's actually called Edgeware, or Metal Edgeware is the other name. So you have something that looks like this, right? So you have this being applied everywhere, which is kind of sweet. And you can change that wear level way down, right? Like maybe you don't want it to be so intense. The other nice thing here too with this Metal Edgeware is you can, again, do that same blurred slope. Like this to me is pretty intense everywhere. And you can change that wear contrast. Like maybe I don't want it to be so grungy everywhere. That scale maybe is a little weird and I don't like it. That wear level maybe needs to go down. But I have something like this, right? So I can change that masking too that's happening. Something like this maybe. And maybe that's all I'm looking for, right? Change that wear level. I've got some of these weights that I can play with. Can change like edge smoothness. It's nice. You can kind of see how that plays. So we get some cool Metal Edgeware stuff happening here, which I like. And this is where you could say, okay, maybe I don't want this to be affected by that same level of Metal Edgeware. But then we can go in here and say, okay, let's add another slope here. Let's add another filter. And maybe we do the same blurred slope on this one too. And then I can change this blur slope to make it feel a little bit better. Right? Maybe this intensity changes. You have something more like this. Which is cool. And then you can go over here and maybe this just wants to be like a soft light layer. Or maybe it wants to be a hard light layer or something. So you can play with some of these things, which is nice. And then, again, you can adjust that overall. So if it feels like it's too bright, you have something like this on there. And that starts feeling a little bit better, right? So we're just kind of adding some depth to this texture before we start going in and hand painting everywhere. So on this metal, we've done a little bit of work to help us. And then if we still feel like we need to go in and add paint layers, it's not that hard to say, okay, I still want to do some of this paint. You hit your paint layer and go down here and just change it to be, again, a roughness or something. And then you need to go over here and color pick. Maybe you want to color pick this color here and say, okay, I need to actually go in here and add some more to this. Or I'm going to go through and hand paint in here some more detail on some of these things because I don't feel like it did quite what I needed it to, right? So I'm going to hit these areas with this. And you can change your alpha in here too. So if you want a different kind of brush, right? You want a different sort of like dirt brush that works a little differently, right? So you can change your brushes. The nice thing here is I have my tablet hooked up, which I feel works a little nicer. So you can get in here and really kind of paint on things. So if you feel like it's missing some of that detail or whatever that you were looking for, you can get in there and paint it in, right? And this does take time, obviously. So you can do stuff like that, right? And get in there and hand paint. Okay, so if we want to talk about some other things, there's other layers and things we can do too, right? So, for example, some of you are going to have some cool like gradient layers and like glowing layers and things that happen. So for my sword here, where I've got this sort of blue effect that happens, there's some ways I can approach doing this too on my sword. So I could just call this like my hand paint detail layer. I can add another fill layer in here, right? So I can add a fill layer and I can make this a gradient layer if I wanted to. So I could make this a color and an emissive. I could even apply a roughness to it if I wanted to. So I'm going to go in here and actually change this to a gradient layer, which I think is through adding a generator. I go gradient. So here's a linear gradient, right? Okay. So let's make sure we get the right color in here. I'm going to do that sort of blue color that I've got. And then I'm going to jump back to my gradient here. And I can mess with this gradient on here, which is nice, right? So I can apply that same color to my object. I can change the contrast here. And I can start giving it some of this feel, right? Now it's not perfect, right? And I might need to do a couple different layers here. I might need to hand paint a little bit more into this, but I can do that, right? And maybe I need to do some more gradient layers in on top of this to kind of get that same effect. So maybe I need this first gradient layer to actually be a gradient color of the, and maybe it's not an emissive, and maybe it's just a roughness map, and maybe that gradient is the color that's a little bit lighter color of steel here. So I get this effect happening first, right? Which might be the better play when you start doing this piece first, right? So now we get that kind of cool shading that's happening in the reference, right? So if you check this, right? Now that I've got the reference open, you can kind of see how that works, right? It has a little bit of a gradient towards that sort of silvery color, right? And then maybe on top of that, we need to do another gradient to get that blue near the top. So we've got this lined up here. We can play with this a little bit more if we need to. However that ends up working there. Right? Pretty sweet. And then I can add another layer. So I can say this is my first, like my metal gradient. And then I can add in some of these other ones. And again, this is all just under this metal layer, right? So this is another fill layer. Maybe we say this is the energy layer or something. So we can add a black mask to this. But then on this color, maybe this one needs to be the color and the emissive. So the color can be that. We'll color pick that, right? So we'll pick that blue over here. So it's like something like this. Then in this black mask, we'll add a generator again. And we'll call this the gradient again. And then here we can mess with that balance. So we get something like this. And this position thing is all like a 3D position generator. These colors don't mean much outside of giving you like a 3D position. So you can see I'm kind of rotating the position of that gradient by changing these. So they don't really do much outside of that. But we go here and do this. You can change the contrast, right? That's really just creating like a harsh line there where you can really back that off. We have something like this. And then maybe this layer doesn't need to be so crazy. Maybe we back this layer off a little bit here. And we have something like this. And this is all just getting us some of that layer to start from. And then I can go in and say, okay, now I have a hand painting layer for this where I can add in some of these effects here, right? I can paint in some of this. I can turn on the emissive here by, I think it's changing some of the environment stuff over here. Where you can activate post-process effects. Since we do have an emissive. It's over here somewhere. Can have shadows turned on too, which is fine. But there is one here that is lighting. Where is it at? Global illumination, I think is what it's called. Emissive intensity. So if we go back here, this layer, and the emissive color we could set to be something like this, right? So now we've got that emissive, and then in here, the emissive intensity can be changed. So it's over here in the shader effects. So I have that emissive intensity. I can really blow out the screen with that, or I can just give it a little bit of an emissive to help push that feeling, right? So now it's got that emissive quality that we were looking for off of that. The glow is happening. And then I can go through and change some of that stuff. So here's another one of those things, right? I don't want that emissive to be hitting these barnacles. It doesn't hit those parts, right? So maybe that's where I need to go back through here and change and maybe make a different folder that says, okay, you know, I actually need to remove some of the things from this. Like, I don't want it to be hitting these tentacles. I just want that to be on the blade itself. So you can change some of that, right? Like right now it looks like it's just glowing all the way through the blade. So if you go back to your masking here, you can remove things from the mask. So I can say, I want this to not be on this. So I'm inverting the value, which means I'm taking these things off of this layer. Because I don't want these to be affected by the blade material, right? And then I can create a new one. I can even duplicate the other one since we've already done some work with this, right? I could duplicate this metal one. I can just call this metal blade, right? I can duplicate this whole folder. Right? So now I have this folder and I can say, okay, in this folder, I actually don't want this layer anymore, right? And I just want this metal gradient to be here. And then I can change and say, okay, I need to actually invert the value for this one and remove stuff from this, right? I can turn off one of these to make sure I'm not doing everything here, but I can remove all of these from this, right? And maybe I want to keep these ones on it, actually. So maybe I want to keep these. Right? But I want to just include this stuff. So this is where some of that layering comes in. To make sure I'm not hitting stuff that I don't want on there and stuff that I do want. So I'm going to invert that value and remove this and this. So I do want all these things here, right? And then here, I do want that to look like this, right? So now when we jump back, now that effect's only being applied where it should be, right? To the sword. And we can take a look at this gradient again. And maybe this gradient needs to be adjusted. But it does look like it kind of goes through here. Something like this. You know, it's got some sort of flow to it. And then this can really get bumped down if it needs to, too. Like, don't be afraid to go through here and adjust some of these layers. Like, if it needs to get turned down quite a bit, then go through and do it, right? And then the reason it's still glowing and hasn't quite turned down is your emissive intensity, right? So you can always change this emissive intensity as much as you need to. So you've got that looking like this, right? So if you're just trying to really get through and get, you know, that gradient to look right, you have some options. So I can really just kind of bump this up here. And maybe I do need to go back into this and adjust this and just make, you know, this first layer of the gradient, right? Where it's kind of hitting here. And then maybe I need to go through and hand paint in some of this higher detail stuff, right? Like I've got this base color now, which I'm looking at here, right? I'm still trying to follow the reference as much as I can. So I can kind of bump up this intensity here as much as I need to. And I still haven't really hand painted that much stuff. That's what I'm trying to, that's the biggest thing I'm trying to push right now, is just show you, like, I'm doing a lot of this with just generators and moving things around to get some of these base layers and materials in here. And then when I need to go in and start doing final painting, I can go through and check my reference and set some paint layers and go through over the top of all my base stuff, right? So here, now that I've got this set, I could do another gradient layer if I want to get a little bit more intense near the top or whatever based off of the reference, but I think this is okay now, right? And now I can go through and really paint in some of this, and so maybe that paint layer turns to be a more emissive, intense layer. So I've got this paint layer in here that's like my emissive intensity or emissive details. I'm going to remove this layer because I don't know what it is. But maybe this is emissive detail. And I set this one to be a color and an emissive, right? So I can get in here and do maybe a more intensive blue. I can always color pick that reference, right? So I can get in here and paint some of this, right? I'm just painting off my detail. You can have the hardness change too. So if you want like a more soft brush, you can change this. So you can jump back to your other alphas. It's up to you. Tons of different alpha brushes in here. Sometimes it's nice to paint with like a soft round or whatever they call that. Maybe you want to go through and hand paint some of this in here. And if this isn't emissive, you can set this to be, you know, your emissive color. I've got these sort of, I think it's called like Coriolis effect. Of like that water that comes. And maybe underneath this paint layer, I need a different layer to kind of push this further, right? But I can start, you can see the idea of like, I'm starting with a base layer, and then I'm going to push through and start painting some of these under layers, right? So maybe underneath this layer that I'm calling my like gradient detail or something, maybe I have another one and I duplicate this layer and I stick this underneath. And I have, you know, a similar color painted underneath that's a little darker or something, you know. Kind of help just push some of this stuff. I think that needs to be darker, but. You can start layering some of this stuff in here to help push those effects, right? Okay, so we talked some about that. I think the biggest thing too to check as you're doing these hand painted things is just really view your reference, right? Like as you're going through and checking out what they've done, like specifically let's hone in on the leather here, and maybe we can step through kind of some processes here of this. Right? So I have this leather material. I did that base sort of deal on there. Let's go through and maybe detail all this out. I think that would be good. So we have that leather. We kind of talked about this blade. This is going to take a while to just sit here and paint, so I don't want to waste too much time. But let's talk about this leather because I think we can walk through all of the processes here. So right now, I know I can take this leather. So I'm going to close up some of these metal blades. So the leather, if I grab in another or drop in another fill layer here into this base leather, I can go through and grab a darker color here. Same value, different darker color. I'm going to throw a black mask on this. If I hand painted something, is there a way for me to copy and paste it to another face? Like if you hand painted this front side and wanted to put it on the back side. I don't. That's a good question. You might be able to. I haven't tried that before. I think you could do like a selection tool and copy and paste. Yeah, I think you can use what's called the clone tool. I think it's over here somewhere. Where is it at? Yeah, so the clone tool here allows you to let you copy. So I think you can say like clone source. I'm going to see if I can figure it out because I haven't used it before. So I think you can hold V to set the source. And then how do I... There's the source, and then I think... No. We'll jump back to that in a second. But I think the clone tool, you can do some of that. So you can say like relative source, you hold V, You click that area, and then if I'm on that layer, I wonder if I can do it. So if I'm on that metal, I click here. I'll have to mess with that a little bit more. It's a good question. I think you can do it. I'll have to play with that more. I'll look into that a little bit more, but I think, yeah, you can. There is a way to do it. It's with this clone tool. Just trying to figure out how that source works. Yeah, that one, you can copy the full stack from one place to another. Like this. So you can do it. See how you've got this scratch in your painting, and you can just copy and paint that somewhere else. Simplest way to use the clone tool is to use it on the content of a painting layer. Yeah. Okay. That's what I did. Oh, yeah. There we go. Sick. Okay. So I held V. It's on a paint layer. So there. And then I just start painting. And it does paint and copy the stuff that I did above, which is kind of cool. You can kind of... Nice. Yeah. Now, I wonder how to do it with the whole stack, though. Like, if I click on this one, maybe? Yeah, that's grabbing everything. Yeah, see, that's just grabbing the detail of the paint layer. But yeah, you can. So you can do it. There's just some more intricacy to copying the whole stack. Okay, let's jump back to this leather really quickly here. So if I jump in and go to my base leather layer, so now I have that fill layer. I'm gonna grab, like I said, just a color and a roughness layer to this. So I'm going to grab a darker leather color here. So I'll click this one. I'm actually just going to make this darker. And I am going to turn the roughness way up here. So I'll make it darker and maybe a little more brown or something. Okay. And then I'll add a black mask to this. And then I'm going to go through and just click on some faces here, which I think will be cool. So if I can go through and just do faces, I can go like this. I don't want to fill the whole chunk. Now I'm I'm having a hard time with this. What's going on? Let's remove this. This should be a color. Yeah, color was set to 1 instead of 0. Yeah. Let's see here. That's right. Here is right. It's still not polygon filling this area. I wonder if it's because I have a black mask on this. Yeah, there we go. Okay, let's add another fill layer here. Okay, color and roughness. Bump this up. Make this darker. I also need to remove from the mask these things. Okay. Okay, we're good here. Let's add. I think if I wanted another darker layer in here, I'd need another folder, but maybe not. Yeah, that's probably fair. So it's here, and then I go here to these. Just have the roughness. You add the black mask. Yeah, there we go. There we go. That's what I was looking for. The other thing I should be able to do now is fill these spaces with that. Okay, perfect. Yeah, hierarchy was messed up. So I can click through here now and add this darker ring around these edges here. The nice thing too is I can go through and adjust this color too. Like if it's hard to see at first, you can do something like this. Make sure you're clicking the right thing. We've got these. Okay, so now I've got all that selected. Now I can jump back in here and change this to be that darker color. So I've got that effect happening, which is nice. And then I can go through and add some surface distortion to this. I can add another fill layer. I can grab this same deal here. I'm going to do just color and roughness again. I'm going to grab color, pick this same red here. And then I'm just going to bump it up. Maybe make it more orange and then bump it kind of up like this. And then I'm going to add a generator to this one. So adding a black mask to it and then adding a generator to it. And then I'm going to do that same, maybe dirt or something here. I can do stuff like this to it. Just give it a little bit more of a worn look. And then I am going to add that blur slope onto this. So I'll add a filter here. We'll give this a blur. That same blur slope. Right? This is just nice. It just gives that hand painted look that I'm going for, right? So I've done some work here and I have kind of generated that hand painted feel. And then I can go in and hand paint in over the top of this. So I've got something that feels pretty good. Now I can go in over the top with a paint layer and call this detail. And I can do a couple different things, right? I can change, like I could say this is the highs or something. So again, this could just be color. So I can color pick, you know, maybe I want to color pick this color here and maybe brighten it up just a hair, make it a little more brown or orangey or something. You can do that, change the value. I have something like that. And I can get in here and hand paint some of these details. I'm going to change my brush. Trying to find a brush I like here. Don't mind that one. Don't love that brush. Let's see. Where's the one I just grabbed? Nope. I want something a little different. That one's fine. Okay, so now I can go in here with my brush, right? And I can kind of start painting some of these details in here. You know, and maybe I paint in some scratches and detail like that. And when I'm doing this hand painted stuff, I'm okay with leaving some of these like little flaws in there because I think it gives it some character, right? And maybe I dial this back a little bit. Or I do like an overlay or a soft light or something here. Something's broken with my illumination. Something's not working with my layer blending, but so they have this edgework kind of stuff happening here. And maybe even I take this and apply a filter to it and slope this too. Like you can do some stuff with this too. Right? Like I painted that edge with my hand painting. Right? And maybe I give that a little bit of a blurred slope to make it not look so like uniform. You can mess around with this stuff. Maybe you want to be a little more aggressive on some of these too. Like with a lot of this hand painting stuff, they do some of these really big generalized kind of area brush movement things that are happening. And that blur slope might do some cool stuff for it. Okay. Anything else I want to hit? I want to talk a little bit about some other stuff too. Like, so paint layers are going to be your friend. Changing the opacity on your brushes is always good. Just like any other piece of software where you're painting, right? You've got different flows and things that you can set on here that help the hardness of your brush, the stroke opacity of a brush, the flow, the spacing, right? You can change how much spacing is happening. You can change your size. So you do have a lot of control over these brush strokes, right? Like if I wanted to go through now and say, okay, maybe I really do want to kind of hit this sort of hand painted look here and just hit everywhere with this kind of different effect, right? And really do this kind of hand painted, like big generalized brush strokes on objects, right? You can do that too, right? I think the biggest thing for me is I like to see this stuff and then I like to see some detail added in too. So like on this detail layer, then I go through with these shadowy parts and I hit this stuff in these areas, right? So now I want to hit these underside areas. So maybe I do another paint layer with a darker color and more of an opacity. And I just hit and kind of build in some of this shading in here, right? Like I do like seeing this stuff too. can get a little tricky with substance around some of these seams, so sometimes you have to paint in these seams and clean them up too. All right, so now I've kind of painted in some of this stuff. Painted in some of that shadow, right? And you can do some layer blending here and help that feel good too, right? So there's some things you can do to mess around and help push that feel, right? Especially with this hand-painted style that we're going for. There's a lot of this like surface texture stuff that happens in here. Just where you can kind of almost see the brush stroke, right? So take a look at that as you're working through some of your objects and building on some of this stuff. But again, you're pushing towards your reference as much as you can. So as I'd start painting more and more of this object, I'd be pushing more closer to this, right? Like I have this base color, right? And as I'm working through some of these metals, I did start with this darkest color, but I'm going to work through and grab more of the like these lighter colors as I'm working through this stuff. So specifically here I have this paint layer now that I can go to. But I am going to go towards a more, you know, lighter color on some of this stuff. So I have this stuff here to look at. So I can color pick some of these lighter colors through here. And I'm going to start kind of painting in these areas more like this, right? But maybe less, you know. I start painting in and around these spaces, right? Try to hit some of this stuff. That dark metal was only sort of supposed to kind of shine through in some of this initial stage, right? Get through and paint in here. Maybe bump up this and hit some of these edges. But anyways, you can kind of see the detail, right? Like I'm changing and painting. Like I built that base color in there, and then I'm going to start hand painting over the top of it. So you're going to push something to hit more of this detail, right? We started with a flat color, and then we're going to go in here and kind of push some of these areas with these brush strokes to help build up the paint layers on these areas, right? So we're hitting this kind of stuff in here. And that's why I like doing the sort of edge wear layers first, because you can hit stuff like this all the way around. And push through some of that paint detail. Like I would not maybe push this hard over here. I'd probably try to do more of a gradual change from this color to this. So maybe you do a little bit, you know, darker color through here to make that step happen. I'm just talking and painting at the same time, so it's you want that to feel painterly and not necessarily so stroked. Like that feels a little better, right? And then you can hit it with the lighter colors. Metal is tough to get right, so it takes some time. Takes these kind of vertical brush strokes and changing that, you know, paint material a few times to get sort of this feel to it, right? This is what I'm looking for, right? You can see now I'm kind of hitting more closer to this reference, right? But we're pushing that hand-painted feel by layering that paint, right? We started with that base layer, but now I'm layering this paint on here. And hopefully you can kind of see where I'm going with this, but it just takes some time to layer paint in and change value and hue. Grab some of these other colors that you've got going on in here and kind of layer this stuff in here. And that's what pushes this hand-painted feel. The other thing that's nice too with the hand-painted feel is like, it doesn't have to look the same everywhere. Like maybe this one on the other side doesn't look quite the same as this one, but because it's that nature of this hand painting, right? Like it feels right. There's the perfection in the subtle imperfections, right? So hopefully you can kind of see the thought. There's some method to the madness here. Maybe I hit some darker colors now because now I want to hit these inside. You know, and maybe underneath. But that hand-painted nature comes from using your opacity of your brushes and layering that paint on each other. That's what really helps push this feel, right? So you can kind of see the difference between here and here, right? And then this is the kind of the look you're going for everywhere, right? Like I'd probably start by moving on to my next piece, right? Like I've got the blade metal layer here. And I'd probably go through and start adding with a paint layer here. And kind of doing the same thing on this, you know? I think I'm on the wrong layer, but I've got my blade layer. Yeah, so now you can kind of see, I could go through here and kind of start hitting the blade with this same kind of thought process too. And painting this up, which will start to feel good underneath the gradient too, right? Like if I kind of hit this blade with some of this idea and follow these same ideas here by layering and layering this paint, you know. I don't want blue, but changing that stroke opacity is huge, right? So when you hit that opacity, what's nice when you do the opacity is it allows that paint to layer on top of each other really nicely, right? So you get some cool stuff that happens from that. And then when you're using your tablet, it lets you kind of layer and layer and layer and make that, build up that texture too. Which is just going to help the piece overall as you move forward through it. Okay. We are at 4:30. We've been live for a little bit. We did have some technical difficulties, but I think I've hit most of what I wanted to hit today, and we'll do more Substance Painter in the next assignment too, so we'll keep just kind of bouncing through this. But yeah, I think if you can go through, I think the biggest takeaway from hand painting inside of Substance is this idea of layering, right? Like this is the feel to that hand painting that you're looking for, right? It takes layers on layers on layers on layers of paint. So check your reference and kind of see some of those colors that you're using. And then don't be afraid to change hue and value to layer up inside of there. Change the size of your brush strokes and layer up inside of this area, and then hit it with, you know, some highlights. That base layer is there to help, right? And then you can always dial back certain layers with your layer blending by changing the opacity of layers, right? But that's the idea that you're looking for, is this layers on layers on layers is what creates that hand-painted feel, right? So try to keep that in mind as you're rolling through and painting these objects, okay? I think this is the best example. Like I can still keep pushing this, but this is the idea, right? Now I've got these cool they have these kind of really cool tentacle things happening here. So I could go back to this area, back to my layer here, and kind of approach how they did those kind of tentacle things on the bottom here. Like they just kind of hand painted in these cool like circles here, which ends up looking kind of sweet, right? yeah, you can go back and change the UV model, the UV map. The one thing you'll need to do is if you do that, you'll probably end up restarting your file. But the nice thing is if you do that, what you can do is take all of this. So you can take all of, say you've built up all these layers. What you can do is throw everything into a folder in the hierarchy. So if you do edit that UV map, you can say, okay, I've put a ton of work into this. You can say, this is my weapon texture. And then you can throw everything here in the hierarchy into this folder, right? So that all lives under this weapon texture folder. Then you can right click this and say, create smart material from this. So I created a smart material. It's going to load it into here. And if you change your UV map, the problem is changing your UV map is generally the last thing you want to do before you start painting. But let's say you do that and you adjust some things. As long as you keep the same layout, if you adjust some geometry and things over here, if the layout for the UVs is the same, you can click and drag and apply that material back to the weapon, and it will drop the texture back on there with this hierarchy of folder structure. Okay? So yeah, to an extent you can. As long as you don't mess with the layout of the UVs, as long as you keep that stuff similar. If you go ahead and swap all these UVs around and change them, then it's not going to work. It might, I mean, you can try. Sometimes it's going to apply texture somewhere that it wasn't before. The smart material was used to do things off of here. But the nice thing is you have your layer structure still. So if you needed to, you could go through and adjust all your masks back to the new UV set. So you don't lose any of your layering and all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? So, awesome. Sweet. Still need to figure out how to fix my light layer. I might have done it. Okay. Yeah. Send me some photos of your light layer and I might be able to help you out through Discord. Just throw some images in there. Some more people ask some questions here. Started working on the blade for the basilisk spine. Yeah, sweet. This is looking good. Yeah, nice. Artifacting and aliasing. Yeah, it is. So you can bump up the anti-aliasing in the bake for this. Like you could do like a 16 sub-sample, like super sample or 32 super sample. See if that helps that. This sort of problem here is from the UVs. You might have a UV laying over the top of something somewhere. Or your UVs might be stacked in an area that's causing this. Yeah, all your base coloring in here. Nice. Have these two shadowy bits. That is probably a... That looks to me to be a UV issue. How is that sitting in the sword? That looks like it's getting the shadow of somewhere else baked onto this. So I would look and see how this sits and maybe if these pieces are stacked. That's what that looks like to me. No, I like what I'm seeing here. Post some more. As you guys make progress, let's keep posting stuff and I can give as much feedback as possible because I think you guys are on the right track. This is looking good. I'd like to see some more. Yeah, I think that's on the right track. Variation in the bones will be cool if you do some more layering of the paint in there. I think that will look good. This one's looking good. I think there's just some dirt generators applied to this at first, so there's going to need to be some paint and layering done to this to help it, but I like where the base coloring is at. And then we talked about this one. I like what I'm seeing here. I like the layering of paint. It feels good. Yeah, I like this. It's feeling good. Okay. All right. Any other questions before I let you take off? I want to make sure I hit all these questions. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties with Maya. We'll get the baking issues figured out. Most of the time, it really is just a Maya issue, though. It is something to do with how it's exported, but most of the time, it ends up being topology or UVs, and it usually we can correct it just by taking a look at the model. So I'll get my Maya up and working, and if we need to do this again, we can. But enjoy your spring break, play some video games, hang out with some friends, spend time with family, and then we'll keep working as we go. Again, just to stress this, right? This is what we're looking at, right? We want this sort of hand-painted effect. It's a similar thing to what we're seeing here. I like what's happening here, right? We're getting a lot of that layering and stuff happening here too, which I like. It's a little bit more cell-shaded, this is, which I think is cool too, where you're kind of hitting it with these big, chunky layers of paint, which I like. This looks good too. So this is the idea. We're not going for hyper-realism. We're going for this hand-painted feel. So it's going to be chunky brush strokes and lots of layering of paint, okay? If there's no questions, I'll let everybody take off and enjoy your Friday, enjoy your weekend, okay? All right. Yep, I think everybody's good. So, okay, I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next Friday. Or not next Friday. Enjoy your spring break. I'll see you the Friday after next, okay? All right. See you, everybody. Bye. Yes, that's totally fine. You can forget about the light layer if it's causing problems. I'm more worried about the layering of paint. So, awesome. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you.